welcome to Game Audio Hour number 14, our weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here is where you find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And this week, our panelists are Alex May. Thanks for joining us again from Japan.
Hello, Kyle. I say the same thing every time, but we've got the Bago acoustic baffling back there.
Nice. Just
doing its thing there. It's kind of changes every week, doesn't it?
What's on the back of the chair? Is there like gum?
Stickers.
Stickers are valuable commodities to little ones. Yeah, they trade them, they buy them. They're
valuable commodities to me. I use stickers all the time.
Speaking of that, let's go to our sticker king, Jack Menhorn.
Hi, everyone.
What's up, buddy? What's new in your world? Anything going on?
Yeah, I got some stuff going on.
You're not going to tell us?
No, I'm going to wait.
Till the end?
Yeah.
All right. I'll be sad. So in the meantime, I'll talk to Mike Shapiro. I'm glad to see you back and to see that you're feeling better. How you doing?
Doing well, feeling much better. I was carrying on the tradition of Game Audio Hour hosts succumbing to illness, but I managed to bounce back in time for this episode.
We all got sick oh, never mind. I was about to do a very gross joke, but I'm not going to do that. But we did end up getting sick in succession, as if we were all together.
Wouldn't we have gotten sick at the same time if we were all together?
Maybe not.
Really need to think these quips through.
I don't think these things through. I'm not a doctor. I don't have to.
I think it's time we scripted some of this stuff.
I'm not scripting this show. No way. Get Gene Simmons on here and say, hey, can we make this look real? So enough about that and my family jewels. Nah, enough about those too. So Alex, you brought up this week's subject, our topic, I should say. So you want to talk about it and tell us what we're going to be discussing and tell everybody who's listening what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. Okay, so I'll just do a little brief introduction. So the topic this week is music and player attention span. And the reason that I raised this is because I was recalling a few weeks ago, way back in the 80s, I can remember the longest I've ever played a video game was about 8 hours, and it was a game on the Apple II, and it was called Alter Ego. And I seem to recall it had a funny kind of monophonic soundtrack, but 8 hours playing a single game. Fast forward to now, and even myself, I'm susceptible to sort of whipping out a game on the train and playing it for like 2 minutes or 1 minute. And I was just thinking to myself 2 weeks ago that for us musicians in game development, the landscape has changed so drastically now that we have to deal with games that people are likely to be playing just a quick in, quick out. Of course, there are still console games where people do play for many, many hours at end, but in the casual space at least, so many games are so much more transient. The experience is very transient, and they're very quick. You jump in, you jump out. So unlike graphics, where graphics you can see and get an impression across in an instant, with music, it's much more a stretched out experience that people will sort of go through from the start to the middle to the end. So what I was wanting to discuss today with you fine gentlemen was where this leaves us as game musicians. Are we now in a place where, as far as development is concerned, we're forced to sort of abandon any sort of idea of gradual musical development over sort of a 5 or a 10-minute kind of track of music? It all has to be very procedural, or it all has to be very instant, or where does this leave us now in this world of such transient attention spans? So there you go. That's the topic.
So I think we should go to Mike Shapiro for the next hour.
Okay.
You always stick me with these impossible topics.
I like the sound of your voice. It's very comforting.
One of the things I found useful about my year and a half at Toastmasters is the ability to talk on any subject, no matter how unprepared you are. And one of the first things we learned is buy yourself time with an introduction, just like I'm doing now. It's a broad topic. If we're talking just about mobile games, which tend to be smaller, which tend to be more casual, then yes, I think this issue comes up. We're looking at music that's typically very retro in formulation. You know, we're back to the days of 30 to 60-second loops, and the technology isn't always there to do interesting adaptive scores or generative scores or even simple techniques like mixing and matching layers. You know, the intensity of your combat on the screen means maybe you hear strings and drums and brass, and as the battle whittles down, you go down to just drums for more of a low-level tension. You know, technical tricks like that they seem to be less commonplace because the game's smaller and the development cycle is smaller and there may not be AI infrastructure. So I do think it's an issue, but it's not unsolvable. I think there are opportunities to non-looping audio in mobile. We just have to be a little more aggressive in bringing the possibilities to the attention of developers and having a toolbox on hand, possibly one that we have to roll ourselves because we may not have the usual middleware for this sort of thing, and being proactive about explaining why it can enhance the game, why it might be cool to have music that has some variety to it that isn't just the same thing heard over and over again. So an interesting question is, at what point do we bring this up? How do we have a practical conversation when we just might be excited to be on the gig and we don't want to make waves? And I would ask Kyle for his opinion on that.
Well, we were kind of talking about this before the show. You gave me some good advice about doing two options when you release something to somebody, and so that would soften the blow of doing something innovative. But to stay more closely akin to the topic of how do we not lose somebody's attention, I'm a big believer in generative music. Our whole company is building a generative music engine, and it's a game engine. It attaches to the game engines, and so I think, in my opinion, that first we have to identify, at least we had to here, how music hurts the listener when they're playing a game. And so we spent a lot of time doing research and reading papers and talking to people in the industry about what they feel is too much music, or what kind of action in music pulls them away from a scene when they don't want to be pulled away. And so collecting all of that information, at least the information that we could get our hands on, helped guide us, or is helping guide us down a path where we will hopefully be presenting a new tool that will allow people to put music in their game at a cheaper price for development, therefore a cheaper price. It doesn't need to raise the price of the game, and will yet not be offensive to the ear. What we ended up doing is what we ended up finding is the opposite in some ways. We became too boring. So we had to we're having to teach our generative engine through the templates that we make how to be more interesting. And that is so subjective. And I'm afraid to vote on anything by committee of like, okay, everybody just decide if this is good or bad, because it just becomes 5 people against 4, and there's no really guarantee that it was good. It's just that those 5 people thought it was. And so I guess since Mike threw it to me, I'm going to throw it to Jack now for his opinion on how to keep. What stage of the conversation are we really talking right now? I guess let me structure it a little better. I think a big part of it is trying to identify what loses players' attention, or what causes them to be unhappy with the music. Jack, at that stage in this conversation, what's your opinion?
Of the
question is, what do you feel when it is a tough question to ask, isn't it? Basically, do you have any kind of hard-coded ideas of what you don't do as a composer because you know it's going to draw somebody's ear away, or they're not going to like it?
Yeah, but I also write really boring music, so it's pretty easy to not do that. I mean, I do a lot. No, seriously, I do a lot more ambient and stuff. Like Nova 111. That music is intentionally like chill out music. Like you get a nice like bed of synth and maybe bass going on when the level starts. And there's 3 three activity states. There's the base layer, then there's a layer when there's one enemy on the screen, and then another layer comes on top of the other two layers when there's more than one enemy on the screen. So when the layer 2 comes in, it's a bit more agitated, maybe something with a bit of movement, and then if there's a lot of enemies on the screen, you know it's hit the fan, so that's when like the drums and like maybe a breakbeat or Euclidean rhythm like jungle thing comes in.
But are you at that point thinking to yourself, I've got to pull back a little bit here because I don't want the music to distract them from this heavy battle that they're involved in?
No, because especially this example specifically, it is a tension state that is temporary. Like ideally, you're either going to die and then the music's going to reset anyway, or you're going to defeat these enemies or take them down to 1, so the music will switch. So it's got a nice ebb and flow going on, which, to go back to Alex, part of his original question is, are we moving away from like the 3 to 5 minute, like you have your statement and then your exposition and so on? Are we moving away from that? And yes, and I think we should. That existed to tell when that whole situation of 3 to 5 minute piece. You know, they start out, kind of tell a story. There's big climax, following action. That was to tell a story. Symphonies, operas, and so on. They're all telling stories. Explicit or inexplicit, they're still there. And in games, we're also telling stories. And in games, that structure of a 5-minute piece that has ebb and flow doesn't work. You got to be dynamic, and I see no reason why we shouldn't move completely to that way. Of course, cinematics or so on will want to have a static piece, but otherwise, the dynamics is what it is because the game is telling the story. So the music needs to serve the game to tell that story. So be it if it has to be broken into stems or loops or sections that crossfade or layer on each other. That's what's going to work, and that's what makes sense. Now, specifically, go ahead, Cal.
So do you see a game's composition, other than cutscenes, as being just these little moments of music that don't necessarily have to tie together, other than their common instrumental base?
Yeah, well, even like something like an old school RPG, a Japanese RPG, almost all of those songs in them, which are well loved by people who play them today, take like Final Fantasy, like all of those songs in Final Fantasy 1, 4, 7, whatever, none of those are more than 2 minutes long. And they're just loops. You go to the inn, there's a loop that plays a specific inn theme. You leave the inn, it goes to a courtyard or the town, it plays a town theme. Then you leave the town, you go to the overworld theme. You get in a random battle theme. Now, all of those might not be in the same key, might not be the same tempo, wildly different chord structure, but they're all part of this overall composition. And it all works together because and I think it should be that way. Maybe not so much such small loops as that with no change in the loops, but it works because when you're in the inn, it's playing the inn to evoke that feeling. The whole point of music is to enhance the experience, the rest of the experience. And so that's what those themes are doing. Now, if you're in the inn talking to a townskeeper or innkeeper, or talking to the bandit in the corner that you eventually have to convince to come on your grand journey, when you're talking to him, if there's a huge climax, or oh no, it's the keys switch to the subdominant. This is going to be a great melody about to come on. They're going to restate the theme or whatever. No, you don't want that. Because you're engaged in the narrative, and you would also get a bit of incongruency if you're in a boring moment and all of a sudden there's this huge orchestral swell. It just wouldn't make sense. So
yeah.
It makes, my opinion is that not that music has to be so subservient that it's just part of this wash in the background, but it's there to serve the game.
In a way, I think this is my feeling, I guess, and it's probably not very practical as a means of looking at how music is applied in games. But in a way, it's a little bit sad. I mean, don't you think that we have lost something by having music become such a very sort of disparate emotional experience that it change. If, for example, you're playing a game where the scene of the game changes so rapidly, one of the unique potentials of music is that very long, the sort of long-term emotional, sounds a bit cliche, but that journey where well-structured music will take you from one place to another. Now, all of a sudden in these games, because the game is obviously, and quite rightly, taking the priority of the player's attention, in a way, it sort of seems like we are losing an opportunity to take advantage of that specific, unique ability that music has to have this long-term emotional transition. Now that everything's chopped up and is so disparate, don't you think that that's a little bit sad somehow, or that we're missing out on one of music's really unique characteristics and abilities?
No, because that exists in other aspects. Like, I listen to a bunch of post-rock bands they'll have an 11-minute song, and that's what they do, is that you have that build-up and that release and so on. And so if I want that, I got that in an album form. Whereas it doesn't have to serve a narrative or a gameplay mechanic or a loop or whatever. But I would also say that there are games that do have that in it, like Rez or Child of Eden, which is the successor to Rez. They do that. You start off, the track's pretty minimal, and as you go on, it gets bigger and bigger until, like, you fight a boss or whatever. Then it's huge and great, and then you defeat the boss, and everything's cool and happy. And so I think, like, Dyad does that a little bit as well. Mostly games that are focused around music being a greater part than the average game is, certainly. Like, even Rayman, which some levels are timed and based solely around a certain song. And so there is that aspect of it. But broadly, I would say no. We've never really had that build up in the culture of game audio, because we went from very small loops to slightly bigger loops to now we're getting layered dynamic audio. So that's not really part of the game audio culture, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, because we have it in other places.
I see. Yeah, I think when with our second game, with Winning Blimp's second game, which is called Mosaic, we prefer to write the music to our games first. So we have the music first, and then we base the game around the music. So it's not necessarily an interactive music game, but the music becomes the artistic spine, or the compass which guides the game artistically. So we use it like concept art in a way. And for Mosaic, I'd written a 10-minute piece of music, and we wanted to make a game from a 10-minute piece of music. And so when it came to actually implementing the music in the game, there was a question that, well, we've got a title screen, and we've got this, and we've got that, and if we've got to cut in and out of this music track, that nobody's going to hear this whole 10-minute thing that I've written. So how are we going to do this? It's like, okay, well, we'll just have the music playing, sort of old-fashioned style, just the music as a bed soundtrack through the whole thing, and it just loops when it gets to the end of 10 minutes, and it's so long that you don't really sort of consciously, it doesn't jar that it's looping because it's so long. I guess in our case, because the actual game itself, it's a casual game and it's a puzzle game, there isn't so much this, there's not so much variation in the emotions that you go through as you play it. So we were able to do that in that case. But when we were doing that, I sort of had a feeling of, not nostalgia, but a little bit of a feeling of sadness, I guess, that there aren't more games that allow you to experience that power, specific power of music, as you said, Jack, that we get when we listen to an album or a very long song. I find it a bit sad that whether it's a current development that player attention spans are getting really short, or as you said, Jack, whether it was never actually that way to begin with, because games have always been based on the experience for the player and sort of split up into different chunks with their respective background music. I sort of started to feel a sense of sadness that there aren't more games where we can take advantage of that power of music to give us a long-term emotional transition.
Yeah, I agree. And also, when I get when I get temps from game companies for projects I'm working on, they're almost always some big epic thing. John Williams wrote, or Greg Williams has written, or they're always something big. So yet when I deliver the project, it's broken up into all the pieces, and I'm trying to find a way to write myself where I merge all of the music together through following that rule of chords in the key of, So if you're in room A and this is a happy place, and we're in like D major or something, and then you're going to go across the hallway, there's going to be some neutral space. I keep the music not in the same key. I shift keys, but I keep them in a key that's familiar, or, with D major, that's harmonious with D major. And then when you move into another place that may be scary, then I'll go into some diminished chord that's all within the scale of D major. And I'm not good enough with theory. I always have to figure it out on a piano. What am I supposed to be playing right now? I can't just say the chords like that. And so in that way, if you go from this room, down the hallway, across the field to grandmother's house, you're hearing one complete piece of music that's just in the same, that's in related keys, but is moving through emotional changes. That's what I try to do, because I think, and I, like you, Alex, I want to experience a game musically as well as visually, and I want it to tickle the brains while I'm solving puzzles too.
Because I think, Jack, your argument, I agree to a certain degree, but one thing that I think we need to be careful with is that when you say, like, for example, we don't need it. If you're saying that if I want a long-term emotional musical experience, then I have the long-form album. But in a way, that's like saying that dialogue in a movie is not important, because if I want quality dialogue, then I'll just go read some literature.
No, because the dialogue serves the story. Whereas in most cases, games are based on what, like a 10-second or 30-second gameplay loop.
But the music serves the emotion, correct?
Yes, but I would also point out that another good example of what you're looking for would be Sword and Sorcery, which has been referred to as the hipster album. It's an album you do perform. You start off in an area, and this music just goes on and on. And like the boss battles, like you fight some weird I Trigon laser thing, and it's all set to the music. Like I can't even really explain it without spoiling it or anything. But yeah, there's situations where going along with the beat, attacks happen. So it's definitely what you're looking for is out there. But I would just make the argument that it's not necessary. And if we were to apply that to, a majority of games, it would serve to their detriment.
Let's wind it right back and talk about what is the point of music in games at all? I mean, why is music in games just a technological development that just sort of came about because, well, it's a game, it's like a movie, and I guess we need to have background music, because that's what movies do. So we started off, well, this is a bit kind of plain with just these simple sound effects, so let's get this monophonic little like tone going on in the background that sounds like a melody, and then, oh great, now we can have 4 channels. Okay, let's get some polyphony happening here, and sort of technologically we've become able to create these full dynamic music tracks that we have now in games.
I have an answer. I know the answer to this.
Okay, I'm just sort of wondering what is the point of music at all then, seeing that it takes on such a different role from music as we know it in general, like, for example, as you said, Jack, in the long-form album, or for example, a classical piece of music where you don't get sort of a 2-minute instant fix. It's a long experience as you go through it. Seeing that the context is so different with the game, what is even the role or the point of music? It's not just a strange phenomenon of the technological development that we've had, is it?
Go, Mike.
I was ready for you that time. This is the same question that has arisen with linear media, with film music and television music, and there there's a history of debate as to whether film music is real music because it's written in a way that makes it subordinate to a story and so on. I assume you're asking this kind of Socratically, like you're trying to stimulate discussion, not because you don't know the answer. So I'll try to answer in the same spirit that you're asking the question, is that music, it's heightening the emotion of the player in a way that resonates with the intent of the game maker. It's letting us emotionally categorize what's happening in the game experience, and intensifies, to whatever extent there's storytelling, intensifies the sense of emotionally connecting to the story. And the style of the music juxtaposed against the style of the game can either reinforce something obvious or can let us see a game in a different angle than we might typically do it. And there's greater immersion and greater engagement in both the interactive and non-interactive storytelling components.
Good answer.
And it's the most important part of the game. Who cares about a game? I do puzzles at home. I do puzzles when I put the dishes in the dishwasher. I don't want to. I hate doing that. If somebody was whistling a really good tune, though, I'd do it more often.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, we when Winning Blimp first started out, we were kind of confused about how to actually integrate music into what we do, because we love music and we both come from the 16-bit generation where you have these kind of soaring themes that are often kind of unrelated to the game. It's just sort of, especially on the Amiga, for example, Amiga people who are watching will remember Turrican 2, where it doesn't matter. It's not connected to the gameplay. I mean, it's just basic soaring and kind of epic music in the background. And we're sort of thinking, well, how are we going to implement this? And I guess we also felt a little saddened that the deeper, more long-term experience of music and the emotional effects that it can have on a person who's listening in the album format, as you said, Jack, that kind of experience, it's quite difficult to do that in a game, especially casual games where you've got these small chunks of attention. So that's why, at least in our case, we decided that we wanted to have music, even if you don't notice it when you're playing. We wanted to have music form the artistic direction of the track, so we have a concept music instead of concept art. And we keep that. We listen to the music, and we may be affected in a certain way by the music, and then we take that feeling that we have and apply it to the visual arts or the game mechanic or the overall sort of game aesthetic design. But I can't remember why I was talking about that. So, Jack.
Well, I mean, I would say that, like, I don't want to give the impression that music is inconsequential or in any way a lesser part of the experience than any other part. I would just say that what you're looking for specifically in, like, a linear file just plucked into a game is not necessarily the best way game audio could use music. But the concept of having a beginning, middle, and end with cool crap happening in the middle, I think happens in music all the time. It's just we have varying locations, and so much like Kyle was talking about moving from one room to the other, that's the progression. They might be different pieces with different file names in different blend containers and different randomized folders, but they're still all the music. So I guess my definition would be all the music in the game is going to fulfill that sort of arc going on. But now specifically for mobile games, I think, you know, we're all just screwed and should weep into our pillows.
Let's let me distill this question down into something a little bit more concise. Let's take an example of the title page. Okay, now the title page in any game, if the game has a traditional title page where you've got the loading something rather than a little cutscene, and then you've got this big logo up there, and then underneath it's flashing, say, press start, right? So this is the quintessential title page. Now, in this situation, it's a title page. You've got the logo of the game right there. This is the doorway to the whole game experience. So you could argue then that the music that you would have with a title page should be very, very it should, as close as possible, represent the theme of the game, correct? So yeah. Now, this particular example is specifically what I'm sort of thinking of with the topic for today, is that, okay, the title page, regardless of the game, maybe a first-time player or a game connoisseur who really enjoys game is going to sort of sit there for 5 minutes to actually just listen to the music and watch the title screen, or maybe watch a cutscene as the music is playing. However, a second-time player or a player with, or for example, a casual player that is not going to be doing that. They're going to be watching the title screen for maybe at most 4 or 5 seconds. Okay, so if we have, if we just wind it back then to actually the purpose of music behind a title page, if it's supposed to be supporting the emotional themes of the game, then what kind of techniques can we do there to actually give our music a chance, so that we don't have to cut straight into our melody, cut straight into our theme right within the first 3 seconds, because nobody's going to be watching or listening to the music any longer than that. What can we do in this kind of situation? And this is sort of more of a, I guess, a distilled version of the question behind today's topic.
I would. So, a couple things. I think a lot of title screens now fall into 2 categories. The title screen is either kind of like the introduction, like a movie is, and so especially a lot of like action games or adult games, you start out with the low bass drone as like the credits appear, and it says like Rockstar Games in conjunction with EA blah blah blah, and like then there'll be a voiceover, and then like the start of the story will happen, much like a movie would start, or a serious TV show would start. And in those game instances, I would say, since they are kind of imitating film, would you just watch the film intro on a loop, or sit there? If you'd already seen it, would you just sit there and watch it again? You might if you really like the movie, but it's more of a linear thing, and once you see it once, you don't need to see it again. The other sort of title screen that exists now, I think, is the type that can trace its lineage back to arcades, where it's supposed to, like NES games had it a lot, even Super Nintendo games had it a lot, but even in Super Nintendo it started going more towards the cinematic in some cases. But it's the attract mode. The title screen has got to have the flashing music, the cool logo, and the bombastic music, which might not I think in a lot of cases the music and the title screen might not actually be indicative of the music in the rest of the game. And so I think it's a bit difficult to use title screens as an example, because a lot of them are either pulling from a different form of media or have the lineage of the attract mode, which, as we all know, is super damn annoying, because it's just going to be some crazy screaming loop or just flashy lights and just the loudest possible major scale ever.
What would be really cool, and I think this is within the grasp of technology, and it's possible this has been done, if you imagine the title screen as prelude to the setup, you know, you're picking options, you're selecting your interface mode, whatever else, and that being a prelude to the introduction of the game, whether that's a cutscene or if it's dropping you into a tutorial world where the parts of the world are being introduced to you bit by bit and you kind of wander through and you get your bearings. Wouldn't it be cool if there was some sense of musical continuity from the very beginning of the game's interface, from the shell or the title screen, all the way into that first interactive moment? There would need to be some kind of loop, but imagine if the music is very premonitional, like I'm thinking in movie terms, you know, the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you don't just hear the big theme at the front, it's very ambient and environmental. Imagine something like that in the interface screen that loops as it has to, but can also provide a continuity and a sense of slow build to the beginning of the game. So the feeling is like, we're getting ready to do something, we're now doing the thing that we got ready to do, but there isn't this huge gap in continuity. It's not 20 years ago from the title screen or something like that. The biggest challenge is I think there's disk access issues when you're on a title screen, and then when you're loading the first level of your game, which may prohibit or make difficult musical continuity. But I feel like if someone wanted to do this, they could. There could be a way to pre-buffer the beginning of the music and kind of be smart about streaming in what's coming afterwards, So there wasn't that feeling of title versus game, and they all felt like they were cut from the same cloth.
Well, it's almost like you handed me that question directly. I mean, that's a problem that we're trying to tackle with our gauge engine right now. Whereas, and the one thing that you had said a few times, Mike, is a bad word around here, which is loop. That's the number one complaint that music, that gamers have about music in the data that we've collected. So in your example of where you would come from a title screen, and I love that, into some process and then deliver them to the main theme later, what we're doing is you set up a template ahead of time that says, here's the key that main theme is going to be in, and here's some of the MIDI of like the, maybe 4 bars of that main theme. And the engine, given that you've already assigned what instruments you want the engine to use, which are going to match what the main theme has, the engine just starts writing music in the key using the instruments of, and doing a little bit of foreshadowing with the MIDI theme that it has, with maybe it'll play just a bar of that on like a clarinet in the background, and you don't know that that's really part of the main theme until the main theme happens later. I think that is a fantastic solution for putting interesting music in games and treating games with the respect that they deserve in a similar way that the movie industry is treated and the soundtracks for movies are treated. And I think that right now we don't necessarily have the tools that give us that capability, and I think that as composers we've been trained to stay away from that kind of mentality, especially when it comes down to, and it kind of relates to Matt M's question in the chat. You do all of this preparation with your music to make it not loop and to be very big, and in the end you hand it over to a studio and they start chopping it up into the bits that they want, and then you give them 8, they take 2, and they loop the heck out of them. I got so excited about what you were saying, Mike, and how it feels like we're on the right path here, but this isn't a show about what we're doing. But to speak about Alex's question of you've got a title screen and how do you want to handle that? My answer was going to be nearly exactly the same as Mike's, in that, do you really want them to hear what the game is all about at that moment, or do you just want them to hear what the title screen is about? Because if there's a cutscene that's happening that's got all the story going, I know I treat that, what are we trained? We're trained by growing up on movies and some video games, and I treat that the same way. I have this music going in the background that supports the visual that they're seeing. If it's just a title screen that doesn't have any kind of narrative going on, and it's just a start button and something like that, I don't spend much time in that area anyway. I don't really sit there and stare at the start button or anything. And I'm not saying you suggested that they do, Alex, and perhaps there's some great music there that I'm missing out on because somebody might be taking that opportunity on the title screen to really lay down some really good stuff, and I'm just hitting start. I want to play.
Yeah, I mean, the title screen, it was really, I wasn't meaning to raise the question as a specific problem that we would need to solve, but I'm just sort of thinking that is a fine example of the situation that we're in these days, or maybe, as Jack said, maybe it's not these days, maybe it's just in games in general, if somebody's going to be looking at the title screen for 3 seconds or 3 to 5 seconds or whatever, and therefore, well, there's not much point in putting that much effort into this sweeping track when people are only going to hear the first 3 seconds of it. Or, in the case, for example, of the cutscene intro, the first time you play a game, you're probably likely to watch the cutscene intro, or maybe the second time if you're eager to get into the gameplay. Again, when you're coming back to the game 1 week after you've owned it, and you're coming back for the 20th time, it's highly unlikely that you're going to watch all of the cutscene. You'll just cut through it, and you'll only hear the first 2 or 3 seconds anyway. So the reason that I raised that question was just as an example of again, I guess maybe it's just me. The sadness that I feel that the great potential of music to take us from one place to another over a long term is so hard to leverage in games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm
And
inclined to agree with Jack's analysis that, yes, we rarely see the kind of musical storytelling in a single piece of music in a game, unless it's a cutscene or something else that's linear. But if you look at the score, I think this is what you're saying, Jack, as a piece in toto, the development comes across the collection of pieces that constitute that score. And if you think about what it's like to actually play a game, that's kind of how you perceive it. You know, as you move through a game, if the game is scored well, then when you get to new and interesting places, you'll hear music you haven't heard before. You know, a new level, and suddenly it's a new theme that's different than the village music and the first level music you've just been hearing nonstop. And there's a real excitement the first time you hear a new piece of music in the same game you've been playing for dozens of hours. And that is kind of the analog to, you know, we've played our exposition, we're going on to the development section of the classical sonata form symphony, and you know, now we're into the variety portion of the music. So I think there is an analogy between the entire score, and it's divvied up into pieces as it is, and the effect of a long form, you know, piece of an album or a piece of classical music, where within a song or within an instrumental piece there is this arc. It may not be satisfying in the way that Alex is yearning for, and I definitely understand that, and I share that feeling. But I think that within games you do have that kind of experience from start to finish within the game across all the pieces of music. Jack, did I rephrase your thesis?
Absolutely, much more eloquently than I did, and in a much shorter amount of time.
I agree, because I had no idea what the hell Jack was talking about.
But I would also say, like, a good example of that is the first Halo game, which is one of the reasons why I'm in game audio, was that game and that soundtrack. They do that well over the entire process, especially like taking a theme and then playing with it in new ways. Like just the normal, in a minor key, the do 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 do. Like they throw that around all the time, but also within that overall sort of narrative of all of the tracks working together, there are sections where a level the music goes like. Starts off with a sort of narrative process. Like, I think the second level of Halo is called Halo, and you start off in a Warthog Jeep, and you're going along, and there's like a huge gong, and then like the chorus comes in with the melody. And if you're doing it right, or you're timing it approximate to what they assume you're going to be doing, you come over a ridge, and then you just kind of see the structure itself, and then you see a valley, and the sun's coming up. And it's super cool, and the music and its narrative is serving what's going on screen, but what's going on screen, just in the same aspect, is serving what the music is doing. That said, if you mill around too long, the music will fade out, and then it'll just be silence, because it is a linear piece, and situations where players have so much control over how they use their time. Any sort of linear progression of the music is going to fall apart, which is where loops and dynamic systems come in to serve that. No, but to keep rambling slightly.
No, please go ahead.
To go back a little bit to the title screen, I think you can also kind of straddle both lines of having cool like musical standalone piece while still serving the game, in that I'm working on a puzzle game right now, and
Wait a minute. We're going to tell us until the end.
Well, I can't tell you what it is, and I can't tell you the name of it, but I'm working on a puzzle game, and so I've been tasked with a title screen as well as 4 levels, or 4 chapters, and each chapter has 25 levels, which is a lot of gameplay time. But so what I'm doing is I made the title track first, which is the big bombastic piece. It's the attract mode. It's going to be the most in-your-face piece because it's the title screen. But obviously I don't want that for the ponderous chapters and levels in the chapters, because someone might be sitting on one level for a long time, moving elements around to make the puzzle happen and progress. But all of the level tracks are going to have elements of the title track in it. So what I'm essentially doing is making a theme and variations. Is the title screen is going to be the initial statement, and then each level is going to play with that in some way. And the game itself, it's a mobile puzzle game, but it does have a narrative and it does have an emotional progression. So I am going to be able to have like the initial statement, first level, still happy, but more of a cool bed, and play around with the melody, do variations and inversions and segments and so on. And then some of the levels after that, not super cool stuff happens. So I'll be able to move into minor keys and relative keys and so on. And so in that way, it's over a long period of time, but the player will kind of have that emotional progression of the piece, but still kind of in a classical form. In addition, that title track is also going to be used as the level select. But again, I'm going to have it broken into stems because we're using Ys. And so the title track goes on, but then when you move to the level select, which is the next screen, fade out the top melody, so then you kind of have a progression of this piece in itself before you move on to another static piece, which may not be in the same tempo or key. So in the same way, I'm able to use the dynamic systems that games sort of require, but in the same way, still fit kind of in what I'm assuming you're talking about, Alex, with sticking with more traditional situations that games haven't readily embraced.
I would encourage any game designers who are watching this, or any game audio people who have control over the development process of their games. I would encourage people to really seriously consider abandoning visual concept art in place of concept music, because it gives you a foundation to do all of those things that you just mentioned, Jack. So I mean, if you want all of your themes, your feel, all of that can be so easily encapsulated in one piece of music, which you can then use to very easily pull out things like ideas for the visual design, or pacing for the game, or how to certain areas where you have game mechanics that have choices that you've got to make. That's quite easy to sort of infer inspiration for those issues from the music. I think I just still feel a sense of sadness, and there has to be a way. If it's behind the curtains, like what I'm suggesting, so you've got the concept music which you're using to build the whole game around. You may not actually hear that piece of music when you play the game, just like you may not actually see that piece of concept art that the artist has done to guide all of the development team. But there just has to be some way, even if it's behind the curtain, to utilize music's potential on a long-term emotional experience. And this is one way that I think, at least in our experience, having concept music instead of concept art, this is one way that we have found has been very, very effective to take advantage of that special, unique power that music has that none of the other artistic mediums in a game itself, except for perhaps storytelling. I suppose you could say that storytelling is also a very long-term emotional transition, but visual art, game mechanics, music just has such a greater power to take you from one place to another, and I think we have to find a way to utilize it some way. And this is the way that we've found that works for us. So I really encourage any developers out there who have control over their process to explore the idea of getting the musician in first, or if you are the musician, creating a core piece of music to inspire people emotionally when they're developing the game. And it all sort of falls into place very easily, all the things that you mentioned, Jack, like developments of things. And I guess then it doesn't become as important to get your full musical message out as quickly as you can in the attract mode, as you say. And also, yeah, many of the other technical issues that come into play with integration seem to fall into place nicely when you have concept music behind guiding the path.
I think it's a very practical technique from a compositional standpoint, is to write a thematic suite of some of the ideas that you'd eventually like to put in the score of the game. You can take advantage of the freshness of the creative process and free associate and write a long piece that's right off the top of your head before you've muddied yourself with all the details of the actual game, and before you're asked to do rewrites and all the 1,000 little battles you might have to fight, which will sap your inspiration. If you sit there and write a thematic suite at the outset, where your highest energy point, you might find you've generated enough musical material to get through the whole score. So even if the producers aren't interested in hearing it, which would be a shame, but let's say that they don't want to hear it, you've still got something for yourself that's a very practical creative tool and a resource you can fall back upon, particularly at the end of the project where time may be short and your energy may be short. Wouldn't it be great to refer to this wellspring of ideas that you wrote earlier?
Yeah, and also the coders have something to listen to while they work.
It's true. You can kind of guide them gently in the direction you'd like things to go eventually.
There's one other game, Supergiant's Bastion, the classic. Darren Korb's soundtrack for that. That was also written at the very, very beginning of the development process as well. And I don't know whether or not there are reflections of that development process in the final outcome of that game and the way that music is implemented into it, because it is a very interesting and effective implementation of music. But I don't know whether this style of development, concept music over concept art, I don't know whether this style of development leads to a certain kind of game or a certain kind of musical implementation or flavor for the final product, but it's great fun. And I guess as we're all musicians, all of us can kind of easily identify with the idea of encapsulating all of the artistic musical ideas that we have at the beginning in one little, as you said, Mike, in one little concise little package now that we can, or long package, as the case may be, which we can then utilize as we go along.
And if you're lucky, maybe that music will be used on a credit screen at the end, or maybe it will be the title screen music, or it'll find some home within the game, even if it wasn't on the bill of fare at the outset.
Right.
Yeah, for Nova 111, we kind of accidentally did concept music. So when we started, it was me, Eddie the programmer, and Michael the artist, like the first germ of the idea starting. And so Eddie was like, I want some music. So of course, I immediately before seeing anything, I wrote 3 tracks. And then Michael, in parallel, Michael started making backgrounds and sprites and so on. And then then I saw his art, which looked really cool. And then he listened to my music and was like, well, this is all really cool, but I'm gonna have to make I want to make the game world a bit darker to match this music. So in that way, the music did kind of influence the visual aesthetic of the game.
Yeah, I think that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. That's the way it should be. I think that's an easy way to take advantage of, as I've been saying this whole time, the music's power over a long-term emotional transition.
And the funny thing is, those tracks. Since then, I feel those tracks are not indicative of what the game design and the visual aesthetic is as far as in gameplay. So I still have those tracks, and those tracks are still part of the game, but those tracks will be like the title screen or the credits screen because they are much more linear and don't make as much sense during the gameplay loop, which is where the newer tracks I've made are a bit more ambient, a bit more dynamic, which make more sense in the gameplay world. So we're using them, but not in the same way I initially had envisioned them to be. So I guess in that way they're fairly concept-ish.
I think it's easier to go from a piece of music that's very dense with themes and then spin out something that's more atmospheric and ambient, essentially a development of material, than it is to go the other way around. So it is nice to gather your forces and then create 1,000 variations or more lower energy or more ambient variations of the same thing.
No, absolutely. I'm actually doing that on another game, Lemma, where I did make the kind of bombastic, because we made the Kickstarter, so I made a bombastic, super intense track with identifiable melodies and easily hearable progressions, and then the designer and programmer Evan was like, well, I want all music to tie into this. So then the ambient stuff, okay, well, I'll just take the melody, make it a softer instrument, slow it way down, maybe throw a nice synth bed under there. Boom, got an ambient track that can go on. Whereas if I started with the ambient track, it would have been so much harder to make a huge, interesting, bombastic sort of track to go at the front of this Kickstarter video.
Mm-hmm. Kyle?
Oh man, I'm just having a good time listening to you guys talk about it. I don't have anything to add, really. You guys have covered it all. I do want to say that on a separate note, and earlier, related to something we were talking about earlier, about title screens. I was playing a game recently, I'm not going to say, and they've released a couple of updates to that game, adding more content. And the title screen of the original release was fantastic, and the title screen of the next update was fantastic, and the third update was terrible. And I totally was pulled out of the game. Perhaps it's because audio is what I do for a living, but I put the game in all excited to play the new material, and next thing I know, I'm going, oh, this music is so bad. So there's and I thought in that moment, I thought, okay, well, the reason I don't like it, and to be fair, I'm being awfully judgmental, I apologize, is just because it doesn't appeal to me. It doesn't mean that the people who are putting the game together didn't think it was great music. It doesn't mean that the person who composed the music didn't put their entire, essence into this thing. Or on the flip side, it means that they were under the thumb too much of production and people who aren't musicians who are trying to, put down some rules. And we all know that that's a tough road to hoe to deal with the changes that are impending when you're putting together a soundtrack. So I really wanted to know who had the final say on this because it seemed so far removed from the stature of the game it was attached to.
So that was some thematic or aesthetic consistency that threw you out there, or was it just a quality of production issue?
It was, and you bring up another point that I didn't say, is that the original release and the first update sounded great, and they used two different composers. So something happened in the communication between those two that kept a consistency and relatability to the game. But the third was a completely disparate situation, and I kept wondering, how did that happen? I really wanted to write and ask, but there's no way to ask without insulting somebody. But I'm curious, from a professional level, what kind of decisions were made. Why did you get another composer? Why a new composer on each update? Why not the same guy? Is he busy? Or was there a change in personnel, given how rife the game industry is with layoffs, and somebody else came in with new ideas? Was somebody trying to do something completely different than the previous ones because somebody felt that the previous ones were stale, where I felt that they really matched the game really well? There's so many questions that went to my mind, and what it exposes is that there are a lot of witches in this brew, and if we want to do something innovative, which you guys know, as we were talking about before we started the show, I try to push that ceiling probably too hard. But we've got to get the whole industry on board about the innovation, and we've got to speak a common language about how we want music to be represented within games. And I don't think, because of the number of witches that are in the brew when it comes to building a game, I don't think that we can meet that commonality. And that's kind of frightening to me. But inevitably, change will happen. It always has, and it always will. And it's just really difficult right now to see what pebbles are creating the path that will grow into a road that will eventually lead to change. Right now I don't know what they are. We're trying to figure that out here. But I'll tell you, it's such an important part of, it's no secret, games and sound design, music and sound design are so important in all of these multimedia things that we have to think as hard as we can about what we're going to change, or how we're going to innovate, and know that we're going to be shot down half the time because innovation is rife with rejection. That was positive thinking.
On that happy note.
I guess I'm just saying that we have to keep pushing forward even though we're getting turned down. Just got to keep trying. And Alex, if you want that musical experience, man, write it, do it.
Yeah,
keep doing what you're doing. Don't let the man get you down.
Yeah, I just it's frustrating. It's like, oh, another 3-second kind of snippet of music. Oh, look at that, the music's changed already. Oh, now we're in a completely different. Oh, that was a bit of a sharp, like a cliff drop there, wasn't it? And it's like, oh, I've just come up against a wall here with the music, and now I've got to rise all the way up there, and just like it doesn't feel like music anymore,
Nah, sometimes, yeah, I can relate to you rather closely on this subject, and I struggle with my own kind of who am I as a musician questions, because I think, oh, I'm trying too hard. Why, this guy is getting hired constantly. And the one thing he sounds like is exactly what he sounds like. And so apparently everybody wants what he sounds like, and I'm trying to be different, I'm trying to be interesting, and I can't even get a phone number. No, that's not true. It's not that bad. But no, it does make you question your own self when you're thinking, we know that we want to do interesting things, and we hear them happening places. They keep popping up in places, which is really interesting. And then I think, oh, that's fantastic. Now that person's trying really hard. One that I can mention is the what's that super scary console game? Dead Space. Yeah, Dead Space. I love that. You guys are just staring at me like I'm like I got a dunce cap on. Anyway. Who did the soundtrack for that? Jason somebody, if I have the name right? Graves? Jason Graves?
Yeah, Jason Graves. He's here in North Carolina.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Nice. There's talent in North Carolina. I'm telling you, Jack. You, Vanessa, Jason.
Yep.
The three of you got that pinned down. So, yeah, that's a fantastic soundtrack. So Mike wanted to spend some time kind of where we'd ordinarily say bye, and I'd hit that big red button, and we'd stop broadcasting. Then what happens is we continue talking without people watching and listening, and we talk about really cool stuff that we think, we probably should have kept that button going. People might have wanted to hear that. So we're going to keep that button going so people can hear that. So if thanks, Chatties, for being in there. If we go beyond the time that you're welcome, or that you've allotted, I apologize. We won't feel bad if you jump out. But I think we're just going to talk about... Gosh, we wanted to talk about some positive news and some just regular stuff going on. What do you guys got?
Well, I wanted to. So last week, after we got off air, Kyle, you brought up this really cool music piece from the Vikings TV show on History Channel.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how interesting it was. Like the vocalist was a woman, but it was like pitched down.
Yeah.
Talking about how cool it was, rather than them just use like a Lord of the Rings-esque score and orchestra. That it was really cool how. I'm
going to grab the link. I'm going to put the link in the chat.
And so, what I thought was interesting about that was it sounded really cool, but I wonder if the reason why they did that was not because they were like, oh, this is a better idea than using Lord of the Rings. I wonder if it was that they only had what's the metaphor? I can't think of the phrase, but they worked within their limits, and that's what it came out with. Innovation spurred on this cool idea that they did. And I don't remember what we were talking about last week, but Alex brought up something similar about working in the constraints breeds cool stuff. And I think this might be a good example of that, in that they couldn't afford a Lord of the Rings orchestra. The composer, they couldn't afford the whatever composer does the big bombastic Lord of the Rings soundtracks. I can't remember because I don't like.
Well, hopefully they just didn't want it. Hopefully they just said, "There's so much that can be done. Let's do something good."
Is there a difference though? Does it matter? Does it matter if it was because they wanted to or they had to? Either way, they came up with a cool thing. Now, if they had $1 billion soundtrack, I would almost bet you that $1 billion soundtrack that they would have gone with the Lord of the Rings instead, because it would have been somebody else's checkbook, and that person would have gone, oh, well, Lord of the Rings does well, let's do that.
Yeah, well, and also you've got they're competing for viewership with Game of Thrones, and this is just so simple. We want our show to stand out, or we want our game to stand out. Let's find the places where we can do something different and make it stand out. It's really easy in the music department just to go, let's write not what you would expect to hear at the beginning of Game of Thrones, because we're not Game of Thrones. Let's do something different. And what I like about Vikings is the artists that they reached out to, I think, I'd never heard of before, and I apologize if I'm saying it wrong, it's like Fever Ray or something like that, is a Norwegian artist, and Netherlandic. Is that even a word, Netherlandic?
Nordic, maybe?
Nordic.
Dutch, Kyle, not Netherlandic.
I make up words.
Hollandaise.
A Hollandaise artist. I know. So, yeah, my point gets lost when I joke about the words that I make up. So, the point I'm trying to make is that they said, let's keep it within the culture of the TV show. I imagine, I'm not speaking for the producers, let's do something that stands out because we have to compete with this other show that's got some similarities. And the game industry isn't doing it enough. They're not doing that enough. They're not looking for unique, even within an orchestration, just do it in a different way. Do it in keys that we didn't expect. Do it using period instruments that are related to the game rather than, do it pre-harpsichord. You know what I mean?
There's probably more of that, of course, in the indie game space where the budgets are lower and therefore the risk is much lower as well.
Things that popped into my head of just doing things different in the musical space or just the gameplay space, certainly. And I think it does come down to working within the constraints. Something like Thomas Was Alone. It's a platformer with just little squares and rectangles that are just different sizes and they have to work together. And that was made by one guy, and so he made them squares because he wasn't a good artist. He hit the sound. There was no soundtrack. Well, there was music, but there was no elaborate sound effects because he was doing the sound effects. So he just used SFXR. He couldn't afford to have super 3D cutscenes or anything. So the story, which is a very good one, is told through narration. And so in that way, he used these confines that he had for budgetary and time reasons to make a really cool experience. Yeah,
limitations will always push you to do interesting. We always just go back to the retro game, the legacy of retro game music, where they're working with such tight technical limitations, but the things that they're able to do are on par and often, superior to what we can do these days with all of our limitless possibilities.
Hey, Mike, what do you got there? I don't want to leave you silently in the background.
What's the question exactly?
I think we're just talking.
There's no question.
I just wanted to make sure we got some time with you.
Well, Kyle, now that we're off the air, what was the game that you didn't like the...
We are not off the air. That button is red. When it's green, I'll tell you.
I tried.
You know very well what it is because I've been talking to you about it.
I'll have to rewind or look at our old emails and try to discern it.
I'll tell you at lunch this week. We're getting together for lunch, right?
Oh, can I come?
Let's do this on air. This is the best time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is awesome.
You want to just go through your iCal right now and just tell us what's on it as long as we're rolling?
You said you wanted an off-air conversation on air. This is what happens.
No, what I wanted was that vibe we get before we start rolling. We're having these really interesting discussions that are topical, but we're not framing them for an audience. We're just kind of flowing, and unintended consequences, they're really interesting. So just do some of that right now.
I will do some of that right now. Let me get my top hat and a cane.
Let's just have some spontaneity right now. Let's go, spontaneity.
My daughter is 8 years old, and she's never seen this ever, I swear. But she walked out of the room. She did something awkward. She walked out of the room like this. She went, boop, 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 boop. And that just cracked me up. The frame, how I think our minds will put together, with enough input, we'll put together a common thing. I think Carl Jung called that synchronicity, that you can have people all over thinking the same basic structural thoughts. Mike, I don't know what we're talking about. I'm just trying not to leave you quietly in the background.
Yeah. Give me a
I think we should finish now. I think the spontaneity is not coming to us.
Yeah, let's sell high and or ahead here.
Alrighty. Well, anyway, so the subject this week was a lot of things. It was more than just attention span versus music, but also how can we push the ceiling and be more innovative? This is one for you, Mike. I'm not hanging up yet because I want to ask. You are an orchestrator. You've been trained as an orchestrator. So are you limited by the instruments that you're using to is your innovation limited because of the instrumental palette that you're using?
Well, I'm not someone who champions innovation or doing something different for the sake of doing something different. Are we losing our connection here? We're getting a little fuzzy.
No, I'm fine.
I'm good. You just got that Barbara Walters lighting.
Yeah, well, I hope it's flattering. I'm only seeing your icon, but I'm going to assume I'm audible. I think especially when you're talking about a live orchestra and not emulation, I think the palette is vast in what it can express. I mean, if you've got a live orchestra and you can't come up with an interesting, distinctive sound, I think that's I don't mean you, but hypothetical you. That's a limitation of ability, not a limitation of the palette. You know, if you think of what's been done with just the standard orchestral ensembles, even if you set aside supplementing it with interesting synthesizer textures and sound design elements, there's just such a variety of sounds you can get out of it, even using just traditional playing techniques. And then when you start telling the violinists to start bowing on the other side of the bridge and all the crazy stuff that was innovated in the 20th century, you know, you're expanding the palette ever further. So I never feel limited by the orchestra. Not every gig requires that particular approach. And on some projects I've done a more intimate sound, and I have tried to be interesting with ethnic instruments and acoustic instruments played in unusual ways. But no, and in fact, even if I was hemmed in by the orchestra, I'm never going to discourage someone to put that kind of music budget in their games. I would lie and say exactly what I'm saying now. What so happens is I'm telling the truth.
Yeah, okay. Unfair question. I was trying to relate it to how you, well, and I guess you said a few ways of how you use the orchestra in innovative ways, but you brought up a really good point, and that I agree with as much as I comply. I mean, I'm always on my soapbox about doing something innovative, but the truth is I'm not talented enough to do something innovative all the time, you know? So I've got to do some regular stuff, and just hope for innovation as it comes and as it's needed. But I agree with you, Mike. It's only if it's fitting do you do something innovative. Boy, the chat room, I guess, went crazy trying to figure out what game that was I was talking about. Why don't you guys be controversial? Don't stick me with it.
I think we should probably finish. Our spontaneity is turning into a 70-minute episode instead of us.
We're going to have to run a talent show and tell Bridget to come and do that tap dance.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. So, but I will say, I have to say, as an ex-Neversoft employee, I hate that they're going. I'm really sad. Did you hear the news, Mike? You weren't here when we were talking about it pre-show.
No. There's
something about Neversoft is no more. The team, Activision says they're going to hold on to the team, and since Neversoft was helping Infinity Ward build Call of Duty, they're just going to have one giant Infinity Ward now, which is the Infinity Ward people and the Neversoft people. But Joel and Scott, who were the last heads of the studio, are going to retire, and they really knew how to do it, man. I mean, Scott was just so fun. If you guys don't mind me reminiscing for 5 more minutes, I'm a huge board game fan, and Scott Pease, I was at one of the conventions here in LA for board games, and Scott Pease walks by, and I'm new in Neversoft, and he totally knew me by my name, sat down, we started playing board games, hung out the whole day. You don't get to hang out with studio heads that often, you know, at a convention, and that was just the way he was, you know. It's just, you know, just awesome. And I remember him saying to me about game design, and I'm paraphrasing, so don't grab a hold of this and say this is a Scott Pease quote. But he had said that, and I use it, that board games are harder to design than video games because, you know, you have to fit everything within the cardboard. And I thought, man, the things that guy knows about designing games is just leaps and bounds beyond what I thought I knew. And I thought I was at a high level of knowledge when it came to game design. But when he just hit me with that shocker, if you really think about that, if you play a board game, not a simple one, don't play Chutes and Ladders, that's not that tough. But, you know, pull out Catan or something tough, and think about that the balance has to exist within that cardboard. Where video games, as soon as we start to break the balance, we can cover it up with a cutscene, or we could, you know, do some really loud music really quickly that makes you go, oh, I didn't notice that glitch in the graphics because that music was really scary. You know, it's just that one comment was just so amazing to me. And then Joel was just an amazing guy to work with. He was so calm and collected. And what I loved about Joel was that when there was any change in the company, that I, being an old programmer before I got into the game industry and working at IBM, where they didn't tell us nothing, you know, you wear a tie and you're a number. Joel would come out and go, okay, so here's what's going on with the sales, and here's how we're going to have to make changes, or sales were fantastic, and here's how I'm passing it down to you guys. It was amazing to work in a company that had just the right amount of transparency. I don't pretend to imagine that we heard everything, but we heard just enough. Anyway, fantastic studio to work for. Somebody today called it the end of the Wild West of video games, and I totally feel the same way. I felt like we were doing it. We were doing modern games, but living in the way the video game industry is supposed to be lived, and we worked our asses off, man. But they did great things too, like that video game companies that I've been around don't do. Like, for instance, if we had to work crunch, it was never on Friday. Monday through Thursday, but never on Friday, and you didn't work the weekend. Now, there were occasions when you worked the weekend because you wanted to. You came in and you did it. You know, there was work to be done, and we would go in. But I don't remember once they said, you have to be here. So, you know, there's just, anyway, hat off to Neversoft. I've got a soft spot in my heart for the nearly, I think it was 4 years that I was there. I really, really miss the guys, and I'm hoping that that Joel and Scott go on to just some amazing retirement plans because those guys totally deserve it. And I'm hoping that the team at Neversoft stays together and gets to continue doing what they want to do without worry about being laid off or anything like that. So come on, Activision, do the right thing. All right, guys, that's my love of Neversoft ending. You guys got anything to promote?
Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
So I have some stuff to promote, but it's not game related, so I feel a little guilty about it.
Do it, man. This is friends hanging out talking about stuff.
Very good. Well, in that case, if you live in or near Chicago, my concerto for orchestra and guzheng is going to be performed by the Chicago Sinfonietta. Not the symphony,
nice.
Smaller one, the Sinfonietta. Sunday in Naperville and Monday in Chicago proper, I think at Symphony Center. So if any of you out there are in Chicago and you want to hear a really cool combination of a 3,000-year-old Chinese folk instrument and the modern symphony, this is a good opportunity for that. And if you go to the Chicago Sinfonietta's website, they've got all the information there.
I'll be there. Oh, wait a moment.
Well, I say we all just invade Chicago. Mike, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm going. So feel free to follow.
You didn't say you were going, did you? You just said it's there if you want to go.
Well, I'm going, so I called that bluff very easily.
I'm harassing you. So, Alex, what do you got to promote?
Just same as last week. If you're interested in hearing
do that again. I talked over it. Sorry. Do it again.
If you're interested in hearing we did the same thing with this game as we did with the others, where we write the music first, and part of the music you can hear in the trailer video, which you can see on our website, which is written right there. So go have a look. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes, winning Blimp. And Jack, it's the end of the show. You now have to tell us everything.
I don't have anything.
What? You waited? You're such a tease.
Designing sound. This is a surround month, so we'll have articles about surround sound, which is pretty cool. So go on there and comment and Facebook like and everything else. And otherwise, I'm working on some things I can't really talk about, but they're cool. Still working on Nova 111, which I keep talking about. That's
awesome. I know what I wanted to talk about today, which I forgot. I built 3 synths today.
Nice.
They were pretty awesome.
Too bad we're out of time.
And too bad we're out of time. What, you hanging up? All right, fine. I see how this is. Anyway, we're going to do a Max for Live episode. I was practicing building a subtractive, an additive, and a granular synth, and I thought I want to refine this down to a really fast process that we could just like put up a screenshot and show people. Connect this, put this here. Here's why you use this. You guys want to watch that?
Yeah.
The enthusiasm.
Unbelievable. Cuts the air. All right, I'm hanging up. With that, that is my last threat to hit this stop broadcast button. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Chatties, for hanging out. And I'll see you guys next week.